Frederick Douglass was born in Tuckahoe, Maryland. The year he was born and his age are uncertain. His mother was a slave and his father was a slave owner, and Douglass was separated from his mother at a very young age and only got to see her a few times during his life. There were 3 main plantations that Douglass worked on. When he was very young, he worked for Captain Anthony on Colonel Edward Lloyd's plantation. He also worked for Hugh and Sophia Auld, and lastly he worked on Covey's plantation. Captain Anthony, like some other slave owners, lived on Lloyd's plantation and helped him work because he had over 400 slaves. Since Douglass was so young, he did not do any outside work or work on the fields. He mainly just did normal house tasks. The main events that Douglass remembered from living on that plantation was the beating of his Aunt Hester. Anthony beat her very bad one night because she was caught visiting with a man. So he continually whipped her, and the more she would scream, the harder he would go. This really scared Douglass because it was his first taste into what slavery was really like, and he also was scared because he realized that something like that could happen to him. Slaves did not have a very good condition on Lloyd's plantation. They only got 1 set of clothes for the whole year. They did not get fed very well, and they also had to sleep on the floor. They would also get whipped for very small mistakes. Once Douglass was sent to Hugh and Sophia Auld's plantation, he enjoyed living there at first because Sophia was very kind to him, and she also started to teach him how to read and write. But once Hugh found out about this, he made Sophia stop educating Douglass because he did not want Douglass to have any knowledge. With the little knowledge that Douglass did know, he was able to understand what Sophia and Hugh were talking about, and he was also able to understand what the conditions of being a slave were actually like. And this motivated him to continue educating himself, and it also motivated him to find a way to escape to freedom. While Douglass was there, he mainly worked on Hugh's ship, but he also did other tasks around the plantation. Hugh was also known for not feeding his slaves very well, so Douglass would purposely let the horses out, and he would have to go fetch them close to the neighboring farm's house because he knew he'd be able to get a good meal from them. Once Hugh found out about this, he sent Douglass to Covey's plantation to be more disciplined. Slaves that were sent to live on Covey's plantation were slaves that were misbehaving, and their slave owners wanted them to become more disciplined. So they would stay there for a whole year and then go back to their original slave owners. Covey made slaves work very hard. He made them work all day as long as they were daylight, and he would only give them very small breaks for meals. Douglass would get whipped at least once a week, if not more, sometimes from running away, but sometimes just because Covey felt like it. This really put a hurting on Douglass, and he really just lost all motivation to continue educating himself and to continue trying to figure out a way to freedom. Douglass eventually, he got tired of being punished and whipped and stood up to Covey. They got into a huge fight, and it wasn't just physical but also a verbal fight too. Douglass ended up winning, and because of this, Covey never touched Douglass again. Later, Douglass regained all of his motivation to continue educating himself and also finding a way to freedom. Douglass ended up going back to work for Hugh Auld on his ship. Douglass did end up escaping eventually from being on the ship because the book did not give much detail on how he escaped, because Douglass did not want to ruin the chance of other slaves being able to escape to freedom. In conclusion, I think Douglass made the most out of his life and tried to stay positive through it all, even though he did have some tough times as well. What helped him a lot through his journey was his motivation to educate himself. His book is such a good example of what slaves really did go through during that time, And if he would not have continued to educate himself, he would not have been able to write that book for us to read. If he did not keep educating himself, he would have been able to tell people about his journey, but it would have been forgotten or changed over time. So now we will always have a true story of Douglas's life and the way he escaped to freedom.